Some people were wondering about getting some tips for this assignment 6, and mostly question 1, it seemed like, and I was kind of describing to the other folks in the room here. I think probably question 2 and 3, unless some other people later on tonight have some questions about those 2 questions from the book. Those are, like most of the book's questions, are relatively straightforward, so there probably isn't going to be a lot of concern from most of you guys about it. But again, maybe there might be some questions from those people in the chat room tonight, and we can go over those in a little more detail if we need to. Question 4, I can probably head off a few little confusing things, mostly just because of my wording here about the first round of strategy elimination, second round of strategy elimination, and you might be kind of curious what I mean by these different rounds of strategy elimination. So let me go and look at an example from chapter 13. And let's see, we had this example of the palace and the castle. And basically how I'm defining a round is you allow each side to make one choice or make one set of choices. So when we had this, again, this castle versus palace, then we would say that if palace is going to charge high, then castle, choosing between 1,000, 1,100, and 1,200, would choose low. If palace is charging medium, then castle would choose between getting a $900 return, $800, or $500 return, or payoff profit. So castle would select this box B, or to charge high. And then if palace was charging low, castle would choose between a $500, $450, or $400 payoff, and so it would choose high. So we could say, sort of in castle's first round choice, given all the possibilities that palace could charge between high, medium, and low, castle's first round choice would be to get rid of the medium price. I think yes, we crossed that off there. So in kind of the first round, where each side gets to choose any strategy that they would like to keep or that they would like to eliminate, we could sort of say that in castle's part of round 1, it would choose to eliminate the medium price. For palace is going to consider all 3 possibilities for castle. And so if palace is thinking, well, what if castle charges high? Then palace's payoff is, again, $1,000 versus $1,100 versus $1,200, and that should be a brown font, but it's not right now. So palace would say, well, we'd rather get this $1,200 payoff versus these other 2. So it would choose a low price. Then if castle was going to charge medium, we already know that castle is probably going to get rid of it, but palace wants to look at all the different options. If castle were to charge medium, then palace says, well, do we want 400, 800, or 500? And so palace would want the medium choice, so I put a little P here. And then if castle charged low, what would palace want to do? 300, 350, $400 payoff. So palace would choose the low price again. So in palace's mind, it would want to eliminate the high price. So we could kind of describe the first round choices as being, well, castle would get rid of the medium price and palace would get rid of the high price. So this slide 13.8, if you animate it, kind of represents what I'm going to call the first round, because it allows each side to do one choice or one elimination. So then when you go to the next slide, of slide 13.9, then the way I'm describing it in the assignment, I would call this the second round. So this is the second round set of choices that these companies can make. And you can see we've kind of gotten rid of the different cells that have been crossed off. So the cells that remained after we eliminated these strategies was cell B and C and H and I. So when I, again, advance the slide to 13.9, then I just have those 4 cells left over. And again, you kind of go through and do the same thing. If palace thinks, or if castle thinks that palace is going to charge medium, then castle's choosing between a $900 payoff versus a $500 payoff, and it would want to choose the $900 payoff. If castle thinks palace is choosing low, then 500 versus 400, well, castle wants that again. So castle's second round choice, you could describe it a couple ways. You could say that castle would choose the high price strategy, or you could say castle would eliminate the low price strategy in its second round choice. Palace's second round decision is to say, well, what if castle charges high? Do we want $1,100 or do we want $1,200? So palace says we would want the $1,200 here in cell C. If castle were to charge low, do we want $350 versus $400? Well, palace would say we would want to choose a low price and get the $400 payoff. So palace's second round choice, again, you could describe it either as eliminating the medium price or choosing the low price. So back here with the assignment, when I say in the first round of strategy elimination, again, kind of think about, well, I'm going to let Papa John's do one choice, and I'm going to let Pizza Hut do one choice, either to, well, it already says here in part A, to eliminate strategy. So of these three possible price or advertising budgets, in the first round, they're going to make one choice of which of these ad budgets to eliminate. So when you get to the, again, the first round is going to allow both sides to do that. So you say, well, Papa John's eliminates this ad budget in the first round. Pizza Hut eliminates this ad budget in the first round. And then after that, you might end up having, this reduced set of choices here. Among these 4 boxes, it might be 4 boxes, it might be some other number in your actual assignment. But again, when I talk about a second round elimination, then it's going to be, well, Papa John's is going to make a second round choice about which of these ad budgets does it want to further eliminate. Which of these ad budgets does Pizza Hut want to further eliminate? So again, I just want to kind of clear up the way I described those different types of rounds. What would be the likely outcome? That should be relatively straightforward if you have a decent handle on how we did this castle versus palace example. So hopefully everyone's okay with question 4 as far as that goes. But on question 1, people were asking questions about, let me see. I had a question about the learner index in part D, but I had a question, an email earlier this week, I think, about how are we supposed to get, I've got quantities here, and I've got prices, and I've got total costs for our firm. And, well, I've got here, determine an equation for price as a function of quantity, which seems like, okay, well, I've got data for those two things, because I've got a P column and I've got a Q column here, so it seems fairly clear that I could run a regression and find out the relationship between those two variables. I don't actually ask you for a total cost equation as a function of Q, although you could do that if you wanted to. But then I go into asking about, well, first of all, you got this marginal revenue. How am I going to figure out marginal revenue? Because I don't have a column of marginal revenue here. I don't have a column of average total cost, average variable, marginal cost, or anything like that. If you don't like doing regressions, the fastest way you can answer this question is just to run 2 regressions using, hopefully you can figure out which 2 types of regressions you would need to run. You may need to set up some squared terms, cubed terms, well, Q squared terms or Q cubed terms, depending on how you think the scatter plots look or how you think these different functions are supposed to look. But you shouldn't only have to run 2 regressions at the most. You shouldn't have to do any more than that, because once you've run a regression, then again you're using your coefficients to come up with these equations or these different relationships that you think are important, and then from there you can derive all the rest of the equations that you need just using algebra, calculus, etc. So you shouldn't have to run like 20 regressions to get the equations that you're looking for. And again, if you are, for any sort of marginal things that you're doing, because I have, you need to find marginal revenue and marginal cost, it's always better to actually take an equation and find the derivative of it instead of doing the, well, let me do this cost minus the other cost and divide it by this quantity minus the other quantity. Those are always not going to be as precise as if you can actually take an equation and find its derivative and do it that way. So hopefully that's a little bit of help on question A. I think someone emailed me and asked about, well, we've got variable cost here, but I don't have anything in this table about fixed costs or variable costs either. If you look close enough, if you look hard enough at the table here, you should be able to kind of tease out what the fixed costs and what the variable costs are. So for B, determine the profit maximizing price and quantity. And so when you see that we have to decide the profit maximizing price, then it kind of indicates to you that, yeah, we're thinking about a firm that has some degree of market power, because the perfectly competitive firms don't have to choose the price. I mean, the profit maximizing price that they pick is just the market price. They have really no choice in it. So since this question is asking about determine the profit maximizing price and quantity, then we're dealing with some kind of firm that has some degree of market power. So its firm demand curve can't be vertical like that. It's got to be downward sloping somewhat. Determine the profit maximizing price and quantity. Yeah, if you tried to solve it algebraically, we have our decision rule about how we should solve optimize these problems. Doing this marginal revenue equal marginal cost rule, that's always any kind of optimization that you need to do. You want to do marginal revenue and marginal cost equal to each other. It's going to be a little weird because we usually end up having marginal cost curves that are U-shaped, which means they have curvature to them, like this one. Well, this one you can't really tell, but this short run marginal cost curve does have some curvature to it. This slide 16 is a little bit better. You can see there's a U-shape to it. So this short run marginal cost curve is going to have a Q and a Q squared term in it. And if I try to set that equal to marginal revenue, which is just a straight line, which would just have a Q term in it, then I've got an equation that has Q on one side of the equation, and then another equation that has Q and Q squared on the other side. So to solve that algebraically, you need to know the quadratic formula, I think it is, which is extremely messy. But I tried setting this question up where if you sort of leave the data in the tables like this, like I said, your table should give you an exact answer. So you should be able to find the optimal quantity without having to do any sort of the messy quadratic equation sort of things. So if you kind of keep the quantities here as they are, you should be able to find your optimal quantity, hopefully. So that would be part B. C, how much total profit would you earn if you set price and quantity according to part B? So there's lots of ways you could figure out what the total profit would be. And then D, I had a question tonight about describe the competitiveness of the market by calculating the Lerner index. And Benjamin was asking, are we measuring the entire data set for the Lerner index? So I'm going to guess at what I think you were asking, and then if I'm not saying it correctly, you can, or if I'm not intuiting your question correctly, you can let me know. So our formula for this Lerner index is figuring out how much higher price is above marginal cost. And again, in our competitive markets chapter, we said that most competitive firms are going to set a price equal to marginal cost. Again, that means that they're earning a zero profit or they're breaking even. And when you have firms that have some degree of market power, then these firms have this ability to set prices above what their costs are. And so this Lerner index is just a way of trying to quantify that. How much higher is the price relative to their marginal cost? And it kind of standardizes it or gives it to you in kind of a percentage term, sort of, by dividing it by the price. And so I'm thinking that Benjamin may be asking, do I need to figure out what this Lerner index is, like make a Lerner index column and then figure out, price minus marginal cost divided by price for a quantity of 0, and then do the same thing for a quantity of 1,000 or a quantity of 2,000. But you don't need to do that, because really all we're trying to figure out is, that's why I put this question last, that's why I did it in part D, because you're figuring out what the best price and quantity is for this company. So they're only going to charge 1. So once you figure out what that is, then you can just say, well, I know they're going to charge this price. They're not going to charge any of these other prices that may be in this table. They're just going to pick 1, whatever the profit maximizing price is, and just figure out what the Lerner index is at that one single price and quantity that they are picking. So again, you don't need to make a Lerner index column. You could, but you don't need to make a Lerner index column where you figure it out for every single price quantity combination. You could just do it for the price quantity that you think is profit maximizing for that company. So I guess that's probably a good head start for the rest of this assignment. Again, if anyone else, I'll record some more videos if we need to, but hopefully that will give you guys some direction.